Music for everyone. Beauty belongs to everyone. Nature belongs to everyone. Every work would be considered a masterpiece. The Spanish cultural foundation is essential for music history. I would say creative revolution. That's partially why I'm so much looking forward to going to Spain. Growing up in California, you feel immediately the impact of Spanish culture. The idea of a tree with the various branches is present in every concert, nourishing a tradition, not only the Spanish music tradition, but also the tradition of this great national orchestra and national choir.
Maestro, in what spirit do you leave Germany to embark on a new chapter here in Spain?
We as musicians don't always define a home as a place where a building is or where walls are, furniture. And in that sense, I'm not really moving away from Germany. Rather, through the generous invitation from Spain, I'm adding a new perspective or a new dimension or even a new focus. And this, of course, is always a very, very exciting to do, to be able to expand as an artist, as a musician, your entire perspectives.
Would you consider Spain as periphery or as one of the gravitational centers in the history of European music?
In terms of music history, everyone would agree that the Spanish cultural foundation is essential for music history. So one would never say that somehow the music tradition or the culture of music in Spain is somehow on the periphery. While yes, most of the works that we are familiar with that we might call standard repertoire, many of them can be traced towards continental countries such as Italy, Germany, Spain, not only Belgium, Scandinavia, England, but also we will always be reminded that this great golden period where we refer to it as the Age of Enlightenment, Spanish culture was a key towards its expansion. So we would consider it really one of the fundamental cultural bricks of classical music.
Would the famous Baroque composer Tomás Luis de Victoria serve as an example for this?
Of the Baroque composers, Victoria is, of course, standard literature. It's performed everywhere. In fact, I come from San Francisco, and there's even a Victoria festival that we have. But the Spanish music history it extends much earlier. When we think about the development of Spain as a cultural entity, we have to look back to the medieval period. We need to look back very, very much, as I just mentioned, to the blossoming of Renaissance music. A theme that I'm working on very, very strongly now and have been for the past 50 years is the Kiji Codex, this very, very famous codex or collection of the greatest monuments of Renaissance music, or many of them, which originated with an aristocratic Burgundian family, but then eventually found its way to the aristocratic families of Spain. And it was from Spain where the codex was added to with Spanish composers, and then eventually presented to the Vatican, where it currently resides today, the Kiji Codex. So these are indicators. Many of the composers are anonymous because they were very much tied to the church.
What is so extraordinary about Spain's classical music?
Spain, because of its history, very well-known history of the Moorish involvement, Islam's involvement, the Visigoths that came down, the Celtics that came, the Burgundian extension later, Napoleon, all these Greece, these various elements. It would be important to realize that this fabric has always been a part of a very, very rich idea of creativity. So, for this, referring to well-known Spanish composers, even though they may have been Italian or tied to other cultures by birth, I'm thinking of Scarlatti, Boccherini, it was Spain that allowed them to blossom into very, very successful composers, whereby so much of their literature stays with us today as fundamental literature to our repertoire. And this is because of Spanish culture.
Which has had a notable cultural impact on the rest of Europe.
A very unique and very rich palette, so to say, because these different cultures, even though one wouldn't say easily, found a way to coexist, and that coexistence not only continues to exist today, but it has provoked and inspired many, many artists, visual artists, performing artists, and especially composers. So by that, examples might be obviously Ravel, Bolero. I mean, what could be more obvious than, or L'Heure Espagnole, or the inspiration of Debussy, or the inspiration of Wagner to set Parsifal and going over the Pyrenees into Spain. All of this, these aspects of a very, very rich cultural history, it has been inspiring artists within Spain, but also outside of Spain for centuries, and that continues today.
Don't forget Carmen by Georges Bizet.
Carmen, yes, of course. I mean, it's not to be underestimated how prevalent Spanish culture is. And it's also important to realize that we're not talking about the past, we're talking about today, and we're talking about the future. If you look at popular music, many iconic popular stars today trace Hispanic roots. Many film stars tied to Hollywood, even, not only artistic films, but Hollywood, mainstream films trace their ancestry to Hispanic roots. So it's something that is not only the past, it's part of the future.
You grew up in California in a little village next to the ocean. What was your first contact to Spanish culture?
I was born in California, but what is interesting is the area in California where I was raised. I was born in the San Francisco, Berkeley area because my parents had just completed university and had their initial professional opportunities in the San Francisco Bay Area. But soon after, the family moved back to the isolated Pacific Coast area, far, far away from cosmopolitan centers, where the original Nagano family farm was established. The Nagano family came to the United States during a wave of immigration where different cultures were immigrating to the United States, and this was at the end of the 19th century. Nagano family came over in the 1890s, but many waves of Spanish immigration, German immigration, French, Italian, Portuguese, and English. I'm citing these because my best friends growing up as a boy came from these different cultures, and how do I know this? It's become during the holidays and during the Christmas time, the families in the small village would celebrate the holidays in each other's homes. And that was a moment that each home could wear the traditional ceremonial dress or costumes of the time, play the popular music and the folk music of the time, sing and dance traditional folk dances, folk melodies. So as a member of an Asian immigrant family, we actually grew up visiting our Spanish friends who had a large ranchero, several rancheros, learning Spanish folk dances. That was my growing up experience in terms of contact with Spain, not with South America or Central America, but really directly from Spain, because this isolated little village was so heavily impacted by waves of immigration.
Have you collaborated with many Spanish artists throughout your career?
For musicians, it's always a privilege to work with great artists. And I've had that occasion on many times, working with great artists. And many of them have been Spanish. In the world of music, we don't necessarily think about nationality, because music, as is often said, is a universal language. So we think about artistry, we think about quality, we think about superlative culture at the highest level possible. So examples of the colleagues that I've had the great honor to work with in the past would include the legendary pianist Alicia de la Rocha, Montserrat Caballé, the great Spanish diva, Placido Domingo, the legendary tenor, Jose Carreras, equally legendary tenor, but Pepe Romero, the great Spanish guitarist. But I would also should mention that rather than thinking of sort of the past or sort of names that we equate with legends or times gone by, this actually continues today. So Maria Dueñas, really one of the most commanding, high-profile young generation of concert violinists today. Really, you can see her name everywhere. It's been really a great privilege and, again, an honor to work with people at this caliber who happen to be Spanish. They are just simply great artists.
You have worked with Björk, Sting, even with Frank Zappa, yet you never do crossover. What about Rosalía, the new Spanish superstar?
Rosalía is a pop sensation today. That would not be an exaggeration. You see her presence everywhere in the popular music world. And I was introduced to her music through my daughter. My daughter heard one of her recordings and was so excited, she called me up on the telephone and made me listen on the telephone to some of Rosalía's songs. And I must say I was impressed when I heard it. I didn't realize at the time what an international phenomenon her work was. And it was only later that I realized my own personal connection was that it felt like her art form was something more than popular music. By definition, being a popular artist is very much tied to trend or fashion. This has always been the case. And trends and fashion, they are conceived to have a limited life span. They work on a dimension that's very, very relevant for the actual time and space that we're living in right now. But as time moves on, other things come into fashion. And that's what keeps the fashion of the popular music world alive, is that it's constantly being replaced with the next trend, with the next mode, with the next fashion. What intrigued me about Rosalía's music is that I heard something more. I heard other dimension. It was only later that I had read that she actually has a conservatory training with a deep knowledge of classical music history, of a cultural formation, who happened at the same time to be gifted with a wonderful vocal instrument and who had the privilege of having a very, very famous career. This does happen sometimes. Examples in my own experiences working with artists who ended up being pop stars or icons, but who come from a very classical, culturally based education. People who come to mind would be Björk, who studied violin when she was really young and has a deep knowledge of classical music literature, or Sting, with whom I collaborated, who was a professor of English. Frank Zappa, who formerly studied classical music composition. Many, many others who have a very, very rich and solid formal education, but also have had the wonderful gift of being able to speak in a way that allowed them to have a connection with what is popular or what is trendy today.
How well would you say you know the National Orchestra and Choir of Spain?
I've had the wonderful experience of working with this ensemble 4 times, but these 4 times have been separated by 3 or 4 years. So even you could say the collaboration has been regular. It's been unusual in that each visit has been separated by a number of years. And in that sense, the collaboration or the relationship with the orchestra has been not only one of connection with a wonderful and important tradition, European tradition, but at the same time a tradition that's in evolution. Generation changes. The last concert which I gave, which was a little over a year ago, was with many, many members of the next generation. Brought a very special energy to the orchestra, combined with what you might call the master generation who have really been familiar and working within the repertoire for many years. A different constellation than, say, 12 years ago when I visited for the first time.
What does national orchestra mean to you?
The best word that I would use for the orchestra would be cultural ambassadors. We have in the world orchestras that call themselves the National Orchestra. In the United States, it's the Washington, D.C. Orchestra, the National Orchestra. And what does that mean exactly? Is it a prestige title that you use? Is it a status statement or something saying that you represent the country? In the case of the National Orchestra and Chorus of Spain, what I have felt every time I visited until now is national in the sense of reaching out, bringing together through communication of the arts. And in that sense, you could say it's the purest form of ambassadorial work.
How would you describe this singular institution?
It has been explained to me and supported by my own reading and studying. As you can imagine, this past year has been heavily focused upon self-education, reading, working with professors about really absorbing the significance of Spanish history so that one has a better idea of how that affects the world today and in the future. These many, many different cross-influences through different groups that have occupied the Iberian Peninsula through the past hundreds and hundreds of years, they remain active today. That makes a mosaic that is really fascinating. This mosaic is different from countries that might call themselves, like my own, a melting pot, where different sources of immigration come together and they merge and they melt together. it's not seen so often, where different aspects of influences are preserved and they form together, not a melting soup or a melting pot, but actually they form a brilliant mosaic of different kinds of spectacular, sometimes contrasting influences. Those contrasting influences make for a rich culture, but it is important that somehow an open dialogue or an active bringing together of these different kinds of integers, that they come together, yes, to form integrity. Integers forming integrity. And that is something that one feels very strongly with the National Orchestra and Chorus of Spain, that they play to a public which includes the entire country of Spain. You would not say that about other orchestras that carry the national title. They may have different reasons. But that active engagement of communication through the arts, through culture, is something that I have found very inspiring.
Does every orchestra have its specific sound?
In many languages, we use the word sound, or we use the word tone, to kind of have a tone. But in German, there is a word that is used frequently, that is a word, to me, closest to what every person who appreciates great classical music can understand. And it's the word Klang. Klang, yes, has something to do with sound. Yes, it has something to do with tone. But it has primarily to do with those aspects that makes music a universal art form. Going above time, going above fashion, going above trend. It's something that speaks at a profoundly universal level, and has something to do about a reflection of self-identity. I think one of the most important and moving experiences I've had. It's happened to me 3 times, in Berlin, in Munich, and Hamburg, where I've had the occasion to sit on public transportation, a train or a bus or U-Bahn, metro, following one of the performances that I've just given, to sit with the public who have been there but who didn't really recognize me. And the occasion was when these audience members said, "Oh, it was wonderful to hear my orchestra play tonight." Yes, last week we went to a visiting orchestra. Yes, they were wonderful. They were really brilliant. But it was wonderful to hear my orchestra. That has something to do with Klang. In Klang, when we hear sound, and we all experience this, there are moments when we hear the past.
And this is the superpower of music, isn't it?
Even in popular music, sometimes when I hear a popular song that was very impressive to me at the time, I will go back and think of the times when I heard that popular song. When I hear the symphonies of Beethoven, it takes me back not just today, not just my student time when I was studying the music, but actually in terms of a existential environment, it takes me back to a different way. It opens the world towards the dimensions that are difficult to explain with words. How do one explain nostalgia, yearning for something? How does one explain an awareness of the ancestral past, or a feeling that one is aware of a historical presence? How do you explain that in words? Or optimism. How do you explain optimism? Or love. If you try to explain love, it's the most embarrassing thing in the world. Everyone remembers the first time that they began a new partnership. How do you explain it? You can't. But through music, you can explain it. Through music, you can explain yearning for the past, or you can explain or communicate hope. These, or even fear, or power. Power is something that we oftentimes tie to political power today. But when you hear music and you hear the power of nature, for example, or the power of conflict, this is of different dimensions. All of this comes under what we would consider klang. It's more than sound, which is three-dimensional. You can see it, you can touch it, you can smell it, just 3 dimensions.
How would you possibly want to shape the sound of the National Orchestra and Choir?
As a conductor, it's very important for us to remember, as a music director, that our affiliation with an orchestra, relatively speaking, is just a very short amount of time. The orchestra has been there before we came, and the orchestra will continue after we leave, as a part of a long tradition. We cannot change sound, we cannot change tradition, we cannot say everything in the past doesn't count, everything in the future doesn't count. It's what we are doing right now. You cannot say that as a conductor, because it simply doesn't reflect the reality. What we can hope to do is to maximize the potential of an ensemble, so that one can listen and hear what that ensemble produces as klang, as an extension of cultural existence or self-identity. You can help nourish that, you can help create an environment where a group of very, very talented fellow artists can actually, together as an ensemble, reach a potential. That's what we hope to do in our collaboration together.
What else comes to your mind when thinking about the attribute national?
The manifestation of that ambassadorial function means active touring throughout the entire country of Spain. So serving or becoming deserving of the national title by actually performing for the entire nation of Spain. But I would say, in terms of social responsibility, it takes on other dimensions as well. The orchestra does actively tour, so not only serving within the nation of Spain, but actually sharing the Spanish culture with the international community. That is a responsibility of an ambassador, and that the orchestra does engage itself. And today, we live in the 21st century, where media, and particularly the internet, is becoming more and more present in our daily lives. So yes, there is no substitute for a live concert. It's an experience, and media or internet representation is exactly that, what I just said. It is a representation. It is not the real thing. It's virtual. And yet at the same time, that virtual contact is also important. In my own life, for example, I really wanted, in my little village, 950 people, I really wanted to go to the New York Metropolitan to hear opera being performed. But for a little farm boy living on the North Pacific, impossible. So every Saturday, I'd run out to my father, who was driving a tractor in the field, and he would stop the tractor and we would turn on the radio and listen to the live Met broadcast on Saturdays. It wasn't the same, obviously, as being able to be at the Metropolitan and experience an opera performance live. It was virtual, but at the same time, it was so inspiring for a young boy to dream, to have fantasy, to be creative, to imagine. And in that sense, the Spanish National Orchestra and Choir, they do appear in media and through internet extensions, streaming, etc. And this is something that we look forward to developing into the future.
There is, naturally, a strong connection between Spain and Latin America. Will this play a role throughout your tenure in Madrid?
As someone who's the third generation of immigrants to the New World, and growing up in California, the Spanish culture is celebrated and evident everywhere. If you just think of California, San Diego, Los Angeles, Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, Morro Bay, Santa Cruz, San Francisco, you feel immediately the impact of Spanish culture, California's history with the Franciscan monks who came and established a missionary chain, which was not only an educational base, but it gave Californians sort of cosmopolitan centers upon which the latter part of California history greatly benefited. And by that I'm speaking about the gold rush, for example, which came many, many years later, or the opening into what we today call the Pacific Rim, with San Francisco and Los Angeles harbors becoming major portals towards the Pacific Rim. This is all grace of these metropolitan centers that were formed. Of course, the influence of California was relatively late because the initial waves of Spanish influence came through South America, or today we refer to it as Latin America. And whenever waves of immigration come, it's not without conflict, it's not without complications. And once again, this role of being an ambassadorial cultural phenomenon, in the sense of opening up communication in ways that words oftentimes fail us. In moments of crisis, international crisis, is when somehow words don't seem to have an effect anymore. We're not able to communicate the essence of what it is tied to our concerns or our priorities. And in this sense, one of the projects that we're working on is through contemporary composition, working with contemporary composers from Peru, Guatemala, and Mexico. Somehow tying together a relationship either through vocal music or through the imagination of a tone poem or a story told through music of current living authors and poets of the Incan language, living authors and poets of the Mayan language and the Aztec language. We felt it would be an interesting project to have, to commission a Peruvian composer and with an Incan text, a Guatemalan composer with a Mayan text, a Mexican composer with an Aztec text, and to bring these influences back into Spain. It would be a way of celebrating South America, Central American culture in Madrid, in Spain, and hopefully to share that celebration internationally, not only in Spain, but to travel the world and share these cultural creative monuments with a much broader audience. Our dream, of course, would also to take these works back to the new world, so to say. So it's a form of dialogue. It is a form of communication where very, very complex issues can be explored that, as I said before, perhaps words might fail us.
So let's talk about your first season. It's a new beginning which is supposed to bring change without rupture. That sounds a little bit like squaring a circle.
It's only my personal opinion. Perhaps it reflects a certain education or a collection of the influences that I've had over the many years. But as I was educated, and that, by the way, that education process continues until today. That's partially why I'm so much looking forward to going to Spain. For a person, and especially for a musician, if the learning process ever stops, then you've stopped living somehow. That learning process should be provocative and exploration, discovery. A music director's role is not to come and perform the works that he or she likes. On a certain level, who cares what he or she likes? It's a personal opinion. It's not enough. The responsibility, if you're being offered the privilege to have that responsibility of leadership of a national orchestra, there are many, many more dimensions that come into play. And these can only be fully approached through dialogue and through discussion.
For the opening concert, you chose Mahler's Second Symphony. Why did you choose exactly this one?
What are the roots of this opening concert, this opening program? Well, it is something that generated out of conversation. The colleagues were aware that, of course, my reputation is very much tied to the Mahler repertoire. And it was very important for us all that this initial program reflect both the National Orchestra and the National Chorus on stage at the same time, so that we really were appearing as a collaboration that was a collective rather than simply one-dimensional collaboration. And it was a suggestion that perhaps we might think about the Second Symphony of Mahler as a first collaboration, obviously involving both the National Chorus and the National Orchestra. Also a work that's not performed that often because of the large forces that are required. To me, it was important that the name that's given to the symphony today, that was not the name that Mahler himself gave to the symphony, the resurrection. Today we live in a world where so many tendencies, there is such a strong tendency to polarize the use of a word or to attach connotations to the use of the word. And resurrection can have many, many connotations that actually have nothing to do with what the idea for the program was. Resurrection, somehow changing course from a way that somehow needed a different kind of direction. Or the idea is that the past is negated so that we go towards a future. All kinds of different kinds of connotations that simply didn't apply. So to me, what was most important, because most people equate the resurrection title with the Second Symphony, was to offer the inclusion of many more dimensions.
Your connection to Mahler is really deep. Your personal score of the Second Symphony has densely been annotated over decades. You told me it's more than 40 years old. So, in your view, how did Mahler himself wish this symphony to be understood?
The idea of cycles is recurrent in Spanish history. There have been many, many challenges that have faced the evolution of what we would call Spanish culture today, and the cyclical creativity necessary to go forward, as we've seen that in very, very dramatic and important ways. Nature, which is spectacular in Spain, from the mountains to the sea to the plains, such a variety of nature. So the idea was to come back to nature as one of the most primitive and yet universal statements of cycle that goes through. And the life, birth, maturity, culmination of life, the autumnal nature of the life, and then going through the cycle again. This is something that every human in the world is touched by. You can't escape it. It's nature. It's a part of the environment in which we live for our entire lives. And that is at the basis for why we offered a commission for work which would bring, in a sense, a cycle to the evening. The choir appears in the final movement of the Second Symphony. Comparisons to Beethoven Ninth have always been made. But the idea was to actually have the choral presence at the beginning, so that it would be a cycle. Chorus, the introduction of the orchestra through the various movements, and then have the choir come back at the end. Resurrection, if we were going to use that title, then a requiem somehow comes into the play. A requiem celebrating the past and the passage into a new phase, going through the phase of the symphony itself with the various movements representing, from Mahler, a kind of a rebirth and a rediscovery to the final movement. Mahler's Second Symphony at the time, when it was given its premiere, it was considered new music. Not without controversy, by the way. It was not universally loved at its premiere as we love it today and consider it a masterpiece. Much discussion. So at that time, cutting edge or representative of something new, the future. We wanted that to be a part of the presentation of Mahler II, which is now Haupt repertoire, our main repertoire, with the new. So we decided that that requiem should not be an ancient requiem or a masterpiece of the past, but potentially a new masterpiece. So we commissioned a composer to write a new requiem. So again, the idea of cycles, past, present, future, before, actual, what is yet to be, up and down, and everything that's in the middle, and the fact that up becomes down, this secular form.
There's actually a fascinating concept for this very season. Mahler's Second Symphony will be the core of it, like the trunk of an enormous tree. Every concert program that follows draws from this great musical work. So, tell me more about the tree.
The idea of a tree with the various branches opening up, or the idea, again, of the cycles within nature being a completely natural part of our lives. This theme is present in every concert. In English, we would say in a dramaturgical way, which offers a line or a certain aesthetic tension that you can feel from the first concert through the entire season. That is an important part of programming that I've often felt, because what we're trying to speak about is nourishing a tradition. Not only the Spanish music tradition, but also the tradition of this great national orchestra and national choir. They are a tradition which I've just mentioned before, is a part of the foundation of cultural expression of Spain today, that will, well, we hope, and through our hope, through our work today, we hope that this will have a relevance and a life into the future. That's why it's important actually to have attention, not just an event that happens and then forgotten, but actually something that is related to each other so that we feel that this extension will go on into the future. That was the hope behind each one of the concerts.
That really sounds like the trunk nourishing its branches.
Nourishing the branches, and the idea is that it's through these branches that the tree will continue to live.